Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come in, come in, come in. Pull up a chair. Thank you for joining me, Mark Littlewood, the Director General here at the Institute of Economic Affairs, for the latest in our series of In Conversation virtual events. Well, this one's kind of virtual to you, but real for me, as you'll see in just a moment. I always sit down with a politician, business person, newsmaker, thought leader to ask them a little bit about what they make of the world around us today. Before I properly introduce our guest, let me just run through a few of the boring housekeeping points. This is being broadcast on two platforms, Zoom and YouTube. Please feel free to throw in your questions on YouTube if you're watching us there. If you're on the Zoom side of this broadcast and you would like to ask our guest a question, please put that in the Q&A box. That's the only thing I've got open on my iPad in front of me, so if you put it in the chat box, I won't see it, and I'll try to throw to her as many of the questions as I possibly can. Now that's out of the way, let me introduce tonight's very special guest. Penny, welcome.
Thank you.
You are the Conservative Member of Parliament for Portsmouth North and have been since 2010. You're currently part of the Cabinet Office team as Paymaster General, which is arguably one of the coolest job titles in all of Westminster. I'll ask you what it actually entails in a moment. That's involved responsibilities for transition readiness in regard to Brexit, implementation of UK-EU agreements. You've previously served as Secretary of State for Defence, Secretary of State for International Development, and Minister for Women and Equalities. You are also a Royal Navy Reservist. If that wasn't enough, somehow in your spare time you're now also the author of a new book. I'm going to be picking up some of the themes of this over our conversation. Greater Britain After the Storm, which amongst many other things explores Britain's role in the world, how modernising reforms can help to ease some of the current divisions in the British political debate, and you tell me there's a bit of breaking news. You've just had a very exciting promotion. Tell us what that's about.
Yes, nothing to do with government. I have become a captain in my honorary role with the Navy. So that was very unexpected, but delighted. Captain
Penny, great to have you with us. So listen, I want to start off by explaining to our audience, or hoping you can explain to our audience, what do you do? Paymaster General, who are you the master of, and who do you generally pay in this role? What is the role?
Well, it is a job which doesn't do what it says on the tin. So historically, it used to issue pay, actually for the Navy amongst other bodies. But it's in modern times, it's a role that either sits in the Cabinet Office or Treasury or both, and tends to pick up the themes of the moment. So I do defensive cyber. I'm the 1HMG coordinating lead on that. All stuff to do with resilience and redoing a lot of our risk register and a lot of work coming out of the IR on resilience, which is the main bulk of my job. Deputise for Michael Gove at COVIDOs, deputise for Lord Frost, and I'm his Commons Minister, so I'm on the withdrawal agreement Joint Committee and the Partnership Council, and then a whole raft of special projects, as you can expect. Throughout COVID, there's been lots of knotty problems to untangle, and then I also do inquiries, so the main effort on that has been the infected blood inquiry, and I'm delighted to have got a compensation study set up for those individuals, long overdue.
So I want to start, because I thought I'd put this long behind us. I want to start on this Brexit stuff. So I'm fascinated about this. You're still working on the kind of withdrawal. I thought this was all done and dusted, that we'd got the deal, we're out. Okay, I know there's some issues about the Northern Ireland Protocol that I might ask you about, but what left is there to do over the UK-EU arrangements apart from Northern Ireland?
Well, we're out, but we can do better than the status quo. And I think we should just reflect for a moment that many people, many nations have mooted doing what we have done. What we have done is quite incredible, and I think it's a great testimony to the British people that they stuck with it. They didn't buckle, and we left. We honoured that democratic result. Eventually, but again, the great institutions of our country crunched through, Parliament, courts, general elections, leadership contests, and we managed to do it. It took a lot. It took a general election eventually to get it to happen, but we stuck to it. And I think that says a lot about us as a country. So we should take some confidence from that. But clearly, the protocol in particular is not working as actually was intended, and we need to resolve those issues.
Is that really the only big thing left, or is there anything else that isn't done and dusted, if you know what I mean? Is it just the Northern Ireland Protocol, or are there ongoing problems, I don't know, with what rights people have when they're abroad, or all of the rest of it? Or is it all done and dusted, apart from this issue over Northern Ireland being, some say, slightly segmented away from the rest of the United Kingdom?
Well, I think we need to start thinking about Brexit and these raft of issues, not just in terms of what we needed to get us out, but we're really talking about our future relationship with the EU and with its member states, and that will be ongoing. And I think we should always be looking to improve that, to deepen and strengthen that relationship from a position of independence.
Yeah. Okay. And so on the Northern Ireland Protocol, we've discussed this a lot on the IEA London YouTube channel. We've got a problem here, haven't we? Because if I understand the EU's position, it's, well, there's a land border here and if stuff's going to freely flow between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, that kind of potentially contaminates our single market. And nobody wants a hard border here for all sorts of obvious historical and political reasons. So if there's not going to be a hard border, we're not going to check everything across the border, then the single market, from their perspective, is under threat. Therefore, Northern Ireland is being treated differently to Great Britain and the rest of the United Kingdom. So a Northern Ireland unionist might well say, well, we're in this kind of no man's land now, this sort of twilight zone in which the United Kingdom, of which we're a part of, we cannot trade as freely with as we used to, in order to appease the Europeans for the sanctity of their single market. Is that a fair analysis of the division and the problem?
Mm-hmm. So we published a command paper a short while ago, just before the House rose, and that sets out how we think we can resolve these issues. In fairness to us, we have been continually putting
text on the table.
Text on the table, absolutely. But we should be in a position where we can arrive at a solution swiftly, because we have been part of this trading bloc, and there are obligations in the protocol itself, but also in the Trading Cooperation Agreement, which state that the things that we do to protect the EU single market, and also all the other checks that we want to see to animal health and all those sorts of things, that they should be proportionate and risk-based. What's happening now is not proportionate and risk-based. So we want to take that pragmatic approach. It's in everyone's interests that happens, for our citizens in the EU and in the UK, and our businesses too.
And I mean, at the moment, it's been kind of characterised by the tabloid press as sausage wars, right? But I mean, potentially, you could imagine, if it hasn't happened already, problems with the flow of medicines from, say, London to Belfast, right? I mean, but is this at present really a hypothetical problem, and we're trying to make sure it doesn't become a real one, or is it a real problem as we speak?
So there's several, because there are various staging posts as we go forward, which can exacerbate the existing situation. So we want this dealt with swiftly. And there are already existing problems, I mean, just inconvenience for businesses and also consumers as well. There was a debate, again, just before recess on the protocol, and I listed some of the things that companies and individual citizens are having to endure. And it is not right. It is totally disproportionate and irrational. And what we want is we fully recognise our obligations towards protecting the EU single market, but we have our own integrity for the UK that we cannot abandon that. And what is very clear, unless there is some reform of the protocol, it's not going to hold up.
Okay, so I'm delighted to hear that you're immaculately putting the finishing touches on Brexit and solving all that. What about the finishing touches on getting us out of this god-awful time everybody's had of dealing with the pandemic? Can you tell us now the end really is in sight? I mean, I know there are still restrictions in place. I was mentioning just before we went live, I'm hoping to get out of the country. I've had to fill in a lot of paperwork. But are we just sort of days, weeks away from a full return to normality, or are there going to be fundamental changes that are going to be with us forever?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. And one of the things that I see when I'm sitting doing my work with the civil contingencies team is a whole raft of things that could go wrong. Everything from solar flares taking out all our electric
alien
devices,
invasion, meteorite hits the planet. You know.
So we don't know what is going to happen next. But what we can do is be prepared for that. And I think that throughout this, at the beginning, people were thinking on their feet. Now we have a real understanding about what tools work, what's at our disposal. I think we have done a tremendous job, and everyone in this country can take pride in the vaccine programme. From the scientists down to the volunteers directing traffic, it has been an immense effort. And we are in a really strong position because those vaccines are a baseline so that we can adapt them, just as we do the flu vaccine every year, to cope with any variants. And so I think we are in a very strong position, and we need to make sure that we don't have to go back into these lockdowns. Winter is always harder. There are obviously other pressures on the NHS, but we understand that, and we're prepared for it. And I'm sure that Sarge, in his new role, is really thinking through how we can make sure that healthcare system is very robust going into winter.
Now, obviously, you're not going to want to preempt any public inquiry, and there's a million different facets of the private sector and the public sector that have had to deal with all of this. But do you think there are any early lessons? If you're the person in government really interested in resilience, did we just find ourselves brilliantly resilient from top to toe, from beginning to end, or are there already some lessons that we can derive from how we handled this from the outset right the way through to the vaccine rollout?
There are lessons that we have already learned and put into practice. We've set up new organisations within government focused on a whole raft of health risks, antimicrobial resistance as well as viruses. But also, I think we need to understand the mechanisms in government, what actually really enables you to make a good decision, how you fuse information from a whole variety of different sources and disciplines to help you make the right decisions. So there's been a huge program of learning that's gone on, and that's absolutely right. Continuous learning is absolutely vital in this. One of the lessons from that is about how critical the local response is. And I think this was recognised at an early start, but I don't think we were in the right place to really capitalise on that. But local resilience forums are the front line of this response, and we are now channeling some funding to them to really get them to be as robust as they need to be. And I think that if we, as we go into winter, if we are having to provide any of the services and support that we were before, I think the local resilience forums need the data and the information to be able to tailor that to what they have on the ground, and that is one of the key lessons for me. And
so here's the problem, isn't it? If your whole job is resilience, and you mentioned earlier, God knows what we'll face next. Could be solar flares. I speculated an alien invasion. I think each year the chance that there's going to be an alien invasion is quoted by the bookmakers as about the same as Southampton winning the Premier League. So, you never know. But is there a danger we learn all these lessons and we kind of prepare our resilience to fight the last war? So sure, if another pandemic comes along, well, we'll be, we'll have the benefits of all of the things we've learned. But most likely the next big thing to impact on us is, I don't know, a cybersecurity attack or God only knows what. So how do you approach that sort of resilience of the country in the round, rather than just fighting the last war because, right, we've now dealt with COVID-19? One would surely to God expect suspect that we could deal with COVID-20 better because we've had the experience of dealing with it. But it could well be the threat to our nation is not specifically a pandemic in the next 5, 10, 20 years. It's something completely different.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we have changed about how we're approaching our work on resilience is to work with many more people outside of government. For example, there are new issues such as artificial intelligence that are generating new threats that we need to be aware of, and we need to work with those subject matter experts to really identify that. But once you've got your big long list of threats, you then need to work out how to respond to that, and they could be concurrent events that might be happening, and the capabilities that you'll build to be able to do that need to position you to be the most resilient, so you can cope with the widest range of scenarios. The other thing that we need to do is to be prepared for every and any eventuality. One of the criticisms widely accepted, I think, from the way we used to do the risk register. We've redone the risk register, but the way we used to do it was we would look at all the risks, their impact, and the likelihood of them happening, and we focused our resource on the ones with the most devastating impact but likely to happen. And clearly this kind of pandemic was not part of that focus. Many other events as well. So we've completely redone that and added quite a number of new areas that previously we weren't looking at.
So that's really interesting about resilience, because I would say, you know, obviously everybody tries to judge both risk and hazard. You know, I guess the chance of a meteorite hitting planet Earth is pretty small, but be pretty goddamn devastating if it happened. The chance of influenza hitting us at some point in the next year or two, almost certain, but unlikely to be an existential threat. Doesn't it mean from that we should be getting really away from risk registers and ticking boxes, that we just need to learn lessons about how to make decisions in an uncertain world? We'll never have a spreadsheet saying, well, this one comes out at the algorithm as a sort of 27.8 on the Richter scale or whatever. We just surely need to equip policymakers and arms of the state with being able to act swiftly and decisively in what's bound to be an uncertain environment.
So you need both. I mean, on decision making, I've been very vocal about having better training for ministers. It should never be the case that the first time a minister is in the COBRA chair, that's their first COBRA meeting. So lots more training and support and really helping people be aware of what's going on and make better decisions. That's absolutely right. And also an understanding about what capabilities we have to respond, how things work. That's absolutely vital. But what you also need is the capability to respond to these kind of events, and that takes preparation, it takes training. Exercising is incredibly important, but it also means kit as well, and you need both, and you can't train for every eventuality. I'm very keen that we prepare for concurrent events. You know, if we have a terrorist attack in the middle of floods, in the middle of a pandemic, what do you do? That's incredibly important, and that's where ministers can really play a role and challenge the civil contingencies team to really test what they have in the drawer.
Okay. I'm going to try. I mean, I warned you I was probably going to be a bit curmudgeonly, but I'm going to try to tease out some of what I take to be your optimism about the future. This is your new book, Greater After the Storm. Pretty optimistic read. I mean, the cover suggests Britain's been pretty battered, which it has been, I think. We have had a storm, but Richard Branson calls it utterly uplifting and inspiring. Bill Gates says shines a spotlight on why Britain is a great nation and points the way ahead for it to become greater still. I think you've had various endorsements from Tony Blair, Boris Johnson, Ruth Davidson, Michael Dobbs, Richard Curtis. The list goes on and on and on. How have you managed to get so many great and the good people to agree with you? Is it because you've said nothing particularly radical or offensive? defensive?
So I cannot flog my book on your
No, I can, but you can't.
No, quite. But I think that my co-author is not of the same political hue as me and actually voted Remain at the referendum, and it's a single voice. And I think that one of the things that motivated me to write it, particularly with him, was that I think we really need to come together as a nation and focus on the opportunities ahead. I have always believed that the biggest fault line in politics at the moment, particularly given the state of the opposition, is not left or right. It's optimists versus pessimists.
No, so you and I will find ourselves on opposite sides.
I know, absolutely. So but I hope during the course of this that I may persuade you over, because the things that I hope that we would agree on, that democracy and capitalism are good things, require optimism to work. And I think that pessimism, I mean, we know that democracy is under threat from malign states and a whole raft of other things, but pessimism is also eking away at it. So this is why we've got to really deliver on the ambitions that we've set out and the Prime Minister's set out, because there's a great deal of at stake if we do not.
So what do we need to do other than to be optimistic? So if I promise not to be so curmudgeonly and kind of gammony and negative and sort of pointing at all the government statistics and the scale of the debt and tax is too high and regulation is too high, and instead say, glass half full rather than glass half empty, what do we need more than that? What are the actual transformative changes Britain needs, or is it only one of attitude?
Well, attitude matters, that is important, but I think there's some very practical things that need to be done, and actually the government is doing them. So, for example, we mustn't be limited by what's in Treasury coffers. If we really want the levelling up agenda to work, we have got to find new sources of funding and put them in at a local level. And so you will have seen there's some work going on about how you set up those investment vehicles at a local level. That's not the big society. I think we can reflect on why the big society was a very interesting idea, but it didn't quite carry through. And I've always been very interested in talking to people like Andrew Mawson, who are and other very good social entrepreneurs who do get things to happen, about what is the formula for making that happen. So the levelling up agenda is part of that. Whitehall, there's been, I'm sure you've sat here with many people talking about what needs to happen there, and it is more than civil servants being moved around the country. It's much more partnership working. And then we've also got to produce legislation and enabling regulation where needed at the pace that business and science needs us to. We've had discussions before about the fact that a Whitehall department can't even decide which department should be thinking about this because it doesn't understand what the business is. And for someone who appears in my surgery and can order something on Amazon and it arrives 3 hours later, explaining to them why it's going to take 2 to 3 years in order to get a piece of legislation through is not going to work for them. And we know, I mean, there's clearly a lot of work also been going on to really enable our fantastic science base that we have in this country to develop their inventions here too. So lots of reform. We've made a start on that, but clearly more is needed, and I know that my colleagues in government are ambitious about pushing ahead with that.
Okay, let me tell you why, as of yet, you haven't made me feel like a ray of sunshine, and I'm still a bit gloomy. You say on page 5 of your book, how Britain feels is important too. One of the things I despair of in current policy debate is almost all of it appears to be about emotion and feeling, which is great. Obviously I want people to be happy rather than miserable old sods like me, but it seems to me we're losing some sense of rationality. I really fear that the age of enlightenment's coming to an end. There are all sorts of things that you can't have a sensible, rational debate on. The National Health Service. it seems to be impossible in Britain to even start a debate about, is there anything we might learn from health systems in other countries that we could implement here? Is, you know, sort of how dare you attack the national religion of the National Health Service? I think culture wars have become entirely emotive, not really about a rational assessment of whether there might be a problem with racism or sexism. People seem to have completely lost sight of the fact. I know you weren't saying this about HMT, Her Majesty's Treasury, but sort of balancing the books is just sort of a very old-fashioned view of the world apparently now. Those of us at the IEA who are concerned that the national debt is being passed on generation to generation, that's not getting any traction earlier. Has rationality just exited stage left in political debate? And it seems to me that from sort of Brexit onwards, this has been a phenomenon.
So attitude and mood does matter. Mood moves markets. It does matter. If you are trying to persuade someone to set up a business, the confidence that they have is really important. And I think one of the strengths of our parliamentary system is that I have to go and eyeball business people, my constituents, every week, and I take their temperature. I get a sense of how they're feeling about things, and that is important. But what they want us to do is make things work. They do care about balancing the books. They do care about competence in government. That matters to them greatly, and they are savvy enough to know when things are going well and where we're not delivering, and we need to do more. So I think as a nation we're incredibly pragmatic, no nonsense, and you know, I see that in my surgery week in, week out. What that then means for us in government is that we have to be completely on it. We have to understand why things aren't working, and also we have to be able to communicate certain things, I think, to the public. And one of the things that has always interested me, clearly you can't have a formula between what Treasury raises and spending, but I think some appreciation, for example, about what a business contributes in terms of its taxes, how many nurses they fund, making that connection more explicit, I think will help. And we need some real national missions in this country, and a focus on growth and wealth creation should be one of them.
You're going to love my blue plaques idea then. My idea is that schools and hospitals should have plaques on them listing the taxpayers who've made a particular contribution. You know, you get, if you've given $1 million in tax, you get a platinum plaque, you know, $500,000 gold, whatever, you can work through it. That should be the sort of honours system. Because sometimes all of the argument about business, not all of it, that's not fair, but a good amount of the argument is that only focuses on paying tax as a duty, rather than actually this is the thing that's keeping the public sector going. And there's all of the focus is, oh well, I don't trust businesses to have paid their proper rates. We don't really celebrate the contributors enough, do we?
Well, most news stories about business are generally bad news stories, and there are some things that I think we should be concerned about. Numbers of CEOs of FTSE 250, for example, that have had to go through ethical lapse over the last few years is quite shocking. But what you don't hear about is the good stuff, and there are some fantastic businesses out there, and actually really successful businesses are ones that are pursuing excellence. They're doing good things. They're engaged with their communities, and I think we need to recognise that. And I think you're right. There's a lot of work that's been going on, particularly since we left the EU, about government getting better at talking to business and providing services to business. Just coordinating more what we're doing across government. And I think I did, when I was at the GEO, I did a survey just on one particular issue and how many schemes we had across government. It was eye-watering. It was about 30 different schemes, all on the same issue, all directed at the same HR director, with no coordination. I mean, that's no good. So you'll see, in part because we've had to provide a lot more services and support to help traders, you'll start to see that become more coordinated and be almost like a customer care centre for business. And I hope that that will really strengthen the relationship that there is between business and government, because we have a lot to learn from each other, and none of us can achieve our ambitions without the other.
Okay, one thing I'm optimistic about, so maybe I will be as much of a ray of sunshine as you are on this one, was sort of Britain in the world. And I voted for Brexit. The IEA obviously took no position on it. Some voted Remain, some voted Leave on our payroll. But I was very confident, actually, that if it happened, Britain would remain and indeed become more of a global free trading internationalist country that would look beyond the EU to a whole range of other trading partners. The fourth chapter of your book is about sort of who do we compete with. Where do you see Britain in the world now that we have detached ourselves not from Europe but from the European Union bloc? So what's the sort of picture you'd paint for us? Are we going to become the 51st state of the USA in all but name? Are we going to reconstruct the Commonwealth and be the sort of moral leaders of that, perhaps the economic leaders of that? Where's Britain now going to be in the world? Because I'm delighted that we have not retrenched into being a kind of nativist, pulling up the drawbridge. That was often what was feared. That doesn't seem to have happened yet. But where do you see us going globally? What's our future over the next 10 or 20 years, having more or less, once you've completed your job as Paymaster General, once we've completely got Brexit done and dotted all the I's and and crossed all the T's, where's Britain going to stand in the world?
Well, I think we are, I've described us as a challenger brand, and challenger brands have to do what others are unable to do, or and I also think that, I mean, you've mentioned another, well, several areas where we could be focusing. The Commonwealth we have obviously had a huge focus on that, but there is a massive opportunity in terms of trade. We are doing, as well as Liz Truss signing all these, running around the world signing all these trade deals, she has also been advocating reforms and progressive reforms at the WTO. I think we have a massive role to play in that. And the Prime Minister set out, we need to be a force for good in the world. So you've seen Dominic Raab doing a huge amount on the human rights agenda. The boss has been very focused, particularly in recent weeks, on girls' education, which is a complete game changer to help developing nations. So I think there's lots that we can focus on, but we have to do what others are unable or unwilling to do. And I think our finest moments have been when we've been able to make those interventions. We've been able to be the brokers. And I think that there is a real battle now of values going on in the world, and we know which side we're on, and we have to really take that and make a success of the things we believe in, democracy and capitalism.
Now, on the democracy part, what do you make of the state of British democracy? I enjoyed the 6th chapter of this book. Britain's modern democracy is a mixture of ancient statute and precedent. It is embodied in a relic, the Houses of Parliament. How do you think British democracy has fared over recent years? Has it been found wanting of some of the, I mean, I think during the Brexit, the long extended Brexit negotiations, you can argue, well, ultimately it did get over the line, but look at it hairy for a while, right? We were quite close to the people versus Parliament and Parliament versus the courts, and all of, fortunately, no shots were fired, but it was starting to look as if our constitution was hanging by a thread, might overstate it, but was certainly being stretched to its limits, no?
I disagree. I fully admit it was not fun being there at the time. But and many people will point to that episode and say it's a sign of division and weakness and a weak unwritten constitution. I completely disagree. I thought it was vindication of our democracy, and what you saw was those institutions, people having different views, trying to get a particular result. It took all of those things. It took a general election. It took court cases, but we got there in the end. And you had outside Parliament people representing every possible position, and they were there with their thermos and their fish paste sandwiches, and they were standing up for what they believed in. But the vast majority of people in this country wanted to abide by that democratic result, hence why we have the majority we do today. And I think that is not a sign of weakness. I think that's a sign of great strength.
That's really interesting, because what worried me about it was that we were beginning to become in danger of no longer having losers' consent. Losers' consent is what a democracy is based on, right? If your Labour opponent in Portsmouth North felt very strongly that you were not the rightful MP, and this is felt across all 650 constituencies, and it seemed to me, possibly not numerically, but a good proportion of the Remain side felt that, we got to ask him again, or was it all down to funny dealings with Cambridge Analytica? And, it's obviously any allegations of fraud should be properly investigated. I think there have been, and there's absolutely nothing there. But it seemed to me to speak to a growing intolerance in politics, where people were playing the man, not the ball, and refusing to say, well, there was a campaign, I advocated for X, Y's happened, I've got to get on and live with it. And politics does seem more divided and nastier than ever before, right? Any time in our lifetimes.
So I'd say two things to that. First of all, I don't think politics is nasty and divided. Twitter is not representative of the...
Twitter is nasty and divided.
It's not representative of the country. Most people are moderate, sensible, tolerant individuals. And I think that, I've said it before, I'll say it again, that the real heroes of Brexit were those that voted Remain and accepted the democratic result, which the vast majority of Remain voters did. And fair play to those that desperately were against it and did everything they could at their disposal, as they're entitled to do, to try and prevent it from happening. But I think the results speak for themselves. The second thing I would say is that it's really important, especially given the task that we have ahead, that we do all we can to bring the country together. As a politician, I have always felt it's important to understand where someone else is coming from, why they're so upset, what's motivating them, whether it's on the sort of culture wars issue or whether it's these other big issues. And I think we need to do that at this time. And having some national missions for us to get focused on, because we need everyone to contribute to them, is a good way forward.
And I think, I think you have thrown a little bit of a ray of sunshine on me. I do think that the Brexit thing is largely behind us. I mean, there are perhaps a few Remainers left, a bit like these mythical Japanese soldiers who were still fighting World War II, but by and large, I think we've moved on from it. So let's move on to some of the other problems then, because you persuaded me that one is done and dusted. In the book, I was interested in how you highlighted some of the problems. Part one, problems, you say, and this is about modernising the management that governs us. Government is big, you say. Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that. Government is Byzantine, you say. Well, I'm not going to disagree with you on that either. And government is broke. You even have a graph in here called the graph of doom. Now you're speaking to my script, right? This is painting in black and white the scale of the problem. Let's start on government being big. Government is way too big, isn't it? I appreciate that dealing with a pandemic, a national emergency, is going to distort the numbers. But even in, quote, peacetime, we're looking at government spending being north of 40% of total national income. And in a crisis like the pandemic, north of 50% potentially of national income when all the numbers are in. This is just eye-watering. I mean, by way of comparison, I think some of the most successful countries in the world, the UK historically, Singapore, the United States historically, Hong Kong historically, have seen a state sector of about 20% of national income. I think most economists agree that the Soviet Union had a state economy about 70% of national income. we in the UK have decided to position ourselves possibly slightly closer to the Soviet Union in terms of the size of government than to what all of the empirical record shows about an appropriate size of the state sector if you want to grow and become prosperous and share prosperity throughout the land. That's way, way too big, is it not?
Well, I think we need to get back almost to how we used to run government, which was much more focused at a local level, much more revenue raised and put back in at a local level, and much more partnership working. I mean, what tends to happen in politics is that we have all of these ambitions, whether they're national ones or whether they're things like the global goals to get the world into a much better state, and we are not realistic about actually what it's going to take. And we tend to have these ambitions, and then we have what's in the Treasury coffers, and we tend to be limited by what is in the Treasury coffers. And so the ambitions are still there, they're still our goals, but we don't focus on what actually needs to practically happen. Whether it's domestically or whether it's internationally, our ambitions can only be delivered with private money. And we need to focus much more on enabling private money to be put to those good uses, whether it's a local level or whether it's on things like the global goals. One of the things that always frustrates me about the debate about the aid budget, the difference between 0.7 and 0.5, is that if we just moved 1% of the funds in the City of London into the kinds of investments we want, you would triple global aid flows overnight. Just Britain doing that. That's where we need to focus. And we need to get a blend of finance, public, private, but also philanthropic, in at a local level and put local people in charge of it.
I'm not going to claim it's a simple zero-sum game here. And I agree with you. You and I would agree. We want an enterprising, growing, vibrant private sector. But it's sort of a zero-sum game. If you are going to have the government spending 45% of GDP, there or thereabouts, there is a tax bill that comes with it. And the size of that tax bill means that potential entrepreneurs in Portsmouth or London or anywhere else don't have the wherewithal. We've decided to transfer that wealth into the hands of the government, the political process, not the private sector process. So sure, I'm all with you. For any size of government, it could act competently or incompetently. It could act sensibly or stupidly. And I agree that the size of spending as a proportion of national income does not tell you the whole story. It's quite high in Scandinavia, but in many ways they have a light touch government. It's quite low in China, where I don't think you could say they do have a soft touch government. But are we not of the view that sort of somewhere in the 40s just is way, way too high? Whatever local partnership schemes you want, however close you want to work with business, well, great, let's all get that sorted as well. But the scale of it is just ridiculous, isn't it? Is it going to be our long-term position, the government controlling half of the economy?
Well, I'm not the Chancellor, so I can't make any announcements on that front. But what I would say is that if you want that to be smaller, what you need to do is have a plan about how you can still deliver, because just reducing it is not going to work. That politically it is not going to work. So what you need is a plan for how you can find other sources of income or do things in a way which actually doesn't cost anything. You know, the point to my favourite scheme that the Red Cross run, where they check on older people using school children walking to work. And what you need to enable that to happen is to clearly articulate what the outcome is that you're looking for. And that's why this always works better at a local level, because then you find resource. Tell people what it is you're trying to do, ask for their help, and they step forward. We've seen this time and time again, and we know that there are some very successful social entrepreneurs that have a formula of how this works. That's why the big society ran out of puff, is because it had no practical way forward, particularly for communities that weren't knee-deep in retired chief execs. You have to build capacity at a local level to get this to work. You have to get the private sector to do more, and you have to allow philanthropists to really engage, particularly back in communities perhaps that they've come from but no longer live in. That's the sort of thing that we need.
Okay, but there's two different elements to this, isn't there? And again, I'm massively oversimplifying, Penny, by saying that one part of government is redistributional, and as a relatively high earner, I kind of get that. The government's going to take a slice of my money and give it to those who need assistance. But I'm very old school on this. I think that for a good number of things that are presently provided by the government, I can perfectly well provide them myself. I mean, I don't really want a state pension, but if I don't have one, I'd quite like you to dramatically cut my national insurance contributions so I can pay more into my private pension. I would probably choose to opt out of most of the National Health Service myself. Now, those might be choices that only middle class people can make, but I'm removing a burden on the state sector if I find, only in my enlightened self-interest, right, I'm getting myself off the, whereas at the moment it seems to me there is almost no aspect of my life that the government doesn't have a programme for. And you were mentioning earlier the sort of complexities of everything, the sort of 30 different programmes all aimed at the same HR manager. Doesn't that also speak to do less but better? Focus on the things that government really does have a comparative advantage on. We can argue what that is. I would say sort of, defence of the realm, the delivery of justice. But it's not obvious to me that it has any real advantage over the private sector in a lot of things that quite possibly nobly it is attempting to do, but would be better left to individual voluntary exchange of free men and women.
Yes, I think you are right to a degree, and I also think that sometimes government prevents good things happening. So it always used to frustrate me that some of the schemes that we used to have in DWP prevented people who were self-employed actually being able to take care of themselves and insure themselves. They were actually penalised if they insured themselves against accidents and not being able to have an income. And these are things Whitehall finds very difficult to do. It finds it easy to say no to providing an insurance scheme or say yes to provide an insurance scheme. What it has traditionally found hard is to create an environment where the private sector can provide an insurance scheme, and we've seen that through COVID with live events and weddings and all sorts of things like that. So I think that's right. What we need to learn to do is to set the conditions which then enable the private sector to be able to step in and do those things.
So listen, I've made it an absolute promise to the IEA that I will ask every government minister this, indeed every MP. I'm not particularly picking on government ministers. What is levelling up? Because you mentioned the big society sort of ran out of steam. But I've got a theory here that governments of all stripes come up with a catchphrase which sort of sounds nice and it's almost impossible to disagree with. And then screeds of type is written by journalists, and think tankers like me scratch our head, spending years trying to work out what it means, and then it just runs out of puff. So levelling up is the big idea of this government. The big society was David Cameron's idea. Didn't Tony Blair have the stakeholder society or something? PhDs were still being written to try and work out what the hell that is. What does it really mean, levelling up? What is the guiding principle here?
It's delivering on an obligation that all governments have had but have failed to deliver on, which is to enable every one of our citizens to reach their full potential, no matter where they live. And I think we've got parts of the country that and geographies that are very, very challenged. And that's what it means. And it means that to Clacton, and it means it to Portsmouth, places in the south as well as the north, as the Prime Minister has been very clear. But these things are only going to be successful if they're led locally. If you look at any of the great social entrepreneurs who are doing fantastic work across the country, it is not about writing a big strategy. It's about getting the right local people together, supporting them and just making a start. And yes, there is some government funding. Clearly there's the Levelling Up scheme, there's all sorts of schemes which are building infrastructure as well as answering those calls for funding. But we have also got to look at other ways of getting money into those communities, the private sector being top of the list.
But does that, I mean, the kind of transferring money from, you know, the southeast to build some infrastructure in Grimsby or whatever, I mean, that's not exactly a new policy, right? I mean, the richer areas of the UK have been subsidising the poorer areas of the UK, to my mind, to a remarkable lack of effect over recent generations. In fact, if you look at the areas of the UK that have not performed well over the past, over our lifetimes, those tend to be the areas where the state sector has been the biggest proportion of their economy. London and the southeast, as a proportion of their economy, of our economy down here, well, it's nothing like as big a proportion. I was mentioning earlier, sort of 20% seems to be about the, roughly, the, not exact science, but roughly the sweet spot of what government spending should be. That's not far off what it is in London. Whereas if you look at those areas that have been left behind in what I don't know who we call it, the red wall or the blue wall anymore, these are areas where there's been endless government schemes and activities where the private sector, you could say in some areas, is no more than just providing services to the public sector. Yeah, there are hairdressers and pubs and cafeterias to cut the hair of loads of civil servants, but there's no private sector activity at all. Do we really need another government programme to get private sector activity up off the ground in Lincolnshire, for sake of argument?
So I think there's lots of, I've mentioned a few examples, but government is focused on really supporting the sectors that are going to deliver growth. Science, I mentioned earlier, the work that's gone on there. Us being able to move at the pace that those sectors need us to. So that's what we need to be doing in government. But you're right, and we know the reasons for why that there isn't that private sector investment in those places. It's about quality of life. It's about the drain of talent away from communities people grew up in or went to university or college at, and sucks them out into London and the southeast. And we need to find a way to enable those people to stay in those places. I mean, there are some opportunities that have come from the terrible time we've had of the last 18 months or so, and we know that we can work remotely. You don't have to be in particular locations to do that. We've seen moving civil servants out of London into other parts of the country.
Well, it just makes the state even bigger then.
Well, it's I think, you know, you'll hopefully see some other changes in that department. Michael Gove is very focused on delivering some further reforms. That's all part of it. It's not a sufficient to deliver our ambitions. But it will be a catalyst, and it will provide some reasons for the private sector to take a risk on a part of the country that it wouldn't have done before because it doesn't have the infrastructure in place. It's not going to be somewhere where people want to visit. We've got to change those things, and the quality of life issues are incredibly important for people. And again, come back to it's how people feel.
But is that a recipe then for a really radical look at devolution? I was about to say that we're the most centralised country in the world, the UK. That's not true. I'm pretty sure North Korea is the most centralised country in the world. But amongst democracies, there is an extraordinary level of tax spend and regulatory power, which is determined by Westminster, and more or less a rounding error elsewhere. You know, Wandsworth Council, where I live, yeah, okay, they can dial up or dial down refuse collection, but even our mayors dotted around the country, whether red or blue persuasion, I'm not really sure how much power Andy Burnham has in Manchester. Not enough, to my mind. don't we need to, whether it's at a city level to Portsmouth or Manchester or a county level, and there are real complexities about designing the right system, get real decision making down? I find it ridiculous that 95% of tax goes to Westminster. It might then parcel it out in different ways. If you were living in Germany or the United States of America, it'd be about a 50-50 split. You know, some of my money would go to Wandsworth or the Greater London Assembly, about half of it, and about half of it would go to Westminster. No wonder we haven't got flourishing grassroots if we've got essentially a one-size-fits-all approach to politics, right? Why can't Andy Burnham decide whether he wants a super casino in Manchester? Why is that a national government decision? Why is national government handing out Freeport licences? Why can't the mayor just put their hand in the air and decide to declare themselves one? Don't you think we really need big tax spending and regulatory decisions to really go down? I haven't got the solution to what unit, but to be radically taken out of Westminster and handed to cities, towns, or whatever.
Well, I think that is the direction of travel. Andy Burnham has, given examples of where he would have liked more autonomy to be able to deliver on some issues that were really important to Manchester, homelessness, for example, pre-pandemic. And I think that is recognised, that actually bringing people together at a local level, being able to take those decisions, you create a virtuous upward spiral by doing that. I do also think that we have now some new opportunities that we didn't have a few years ago. I've given the example of work that actually George Freeman was doing when he was at Transport on regulation, because he was looking at autonomous vehicles. He couldn't figure out why the rules around how they were used had to be the same everywhere. So we have some more opportunities, I think, to be able to do
planning,
that.
for example, right? It's not obvious to me why greenfield sites in Hampshire should necessarily have the same protection as greenfield sites in Surrey. That should be up to the people of Hampshire and Surrey. If the people of Hampshire want lots more houses, I guess they're going to have to sacrifice some land. If the people of Surrey decide no blade of grass must die in vain, well, I guess they wouldn't liberalise planning. But at the moment, it's all decided by the Whitehall planning minister.
Well, I think that the way that Whitehall has approached, say, housing issues has been very London South East focused, because actually the main block on developments which are much needed in other parts of the country is the viability of those developments. It's about jobs, not necessarily bricks and mortar. So yes, I think that the greater input that you have and the greater powers people have to exercise at a local level, the better outcomes you get. But I think that is a real focus, and you'll see from the work that's been going on in MHCLG and other departments that is what their view is.
I'm going to bat to you a few questions from our audience, Penny. Some of them, these are anonymous, some of them have come in from named people. IEA fellow Shankar Singham, who's written a lot for us on Brexit and trade-related issues, he's going back to our EU-UK relationship. He says this is a question on the EU-UK relationship going forward. It's critically important to make sure the UK has the best managed border in the world. Part of this relates to ensuring smooth customs processes. Right now, we lag behind the EU in this area. How can we become world leading in this area using digitisation, customs facilitation, and so on?
Well, hello, Shankar. Shankar's obviously written and done a huge amount in this area. We have quite clunky legacy systems in every part of government. And again, what we need to do is to look to the private sector, because actually we often sort of pat business on back in Parliament and say they haven't they prepared well, look at all the hard work they did to get Brexit done. They did some amazing things in terms of new systems to manage their complex supply chains. And I would like to see much more partnership between the private sector, who can come up with solutions very, very quickly to meet their needs, and our clunky government IT. I think we could learn a lot, and creating the interface between the two is worth making the effort to do.
This is another EU-related one where, you know, you and I were both Brexit optimists, I guess, but an anonymous attendee asks, when the UK government when the UK government wanted to have apparently wants to have a more interventionist state aid regime than the European Union, a state aid regime that would have been illegal had we stayed in the European Union. We are using our newfound freedom to make sure that we use our sovereign right to bail out failing companies. Swedish free market economist Fredrik Eriksson asked, has the UK left the EU in order to become more like France?
Definitely not. But what I would say to that, and I mean, a good example of this is something dear to my heart: shipbuilding. We need to think about what we need as a country to thrive. Keeping our sea lanes open, massively important. Size of the fleet, massively important. How do we afford that? How do we afford the ships that we need? How do we ensure we've got the industry here that we are going to need to rely on when the chips are down? We need to be focused on those things as well, because they are fundamental to all the good stuff happening, to trade routes being kept open, and for our resilience fundamentally. I think through the IR, we have a much clearer idea about what those things are. And I will always argue we should have the freedom as a nation to be able to deliver on those things.
Let me just fire a couple of quick questions at you. Patrick McIntosh, a regular at the IEA, he asks, unless we improve education and create relevant skill sets, we can't really get the debt down. This goes perhaps like an addendum to his question. All governments talk about skills and training and all of the rest of it. And again, this is an area, it's not obvious to me that governments are particularly brilliant at delivering. Obviously, everybody wants skills and training. Productivity is pretty bad, so productivity growth, almost zero in the UK recently. If we're going to be this high-tech, modernised nation that you want to see, who's going to provide the skills and the training? Or is this going to be yet another 30 different government schemes, all unbelievably confusing and Byzantine, all aimed at the same poor teacher or tech college that's desperately trying to roll them out?
No, we've got to create the partnerships to deliver on this. So two sectors where we, as a nation, massively under-prepare for is engineers and healthcare professionals. Couldn't be more important given what we've been through. And it's partnerships between, yes, a bit of government, but also private sector and philanthropy that is delivering those training places. The Navy actually has just set up across the water from me a fantastic centre which is going to produce an enormous number of engineers. And it's in partnership with business to do that. They've supplied the training places, they supply the expertise, and what you need to get that investment are things like steady order books, which again is within the gift of government to facilitate. So all these things are linked, but we've got to create those partnerships. And I think over the last 10 years, I mean, when I look at my own constituency, the landscape on education is totally transformed.
Now that you're a naval captain, do you get your own ship? Somebody asks. I don't think that's automatic, right? No, you'll work a bit harder to get that.
Unfortunately, I dream of a day when the fleet will be big enough that might be possible.
And I was going to ask you something. There's I mean, I'm not much moved by opinion polls, but you've come across as very popular amongst Conservative Party members in a poll conducted by Con Home of Tory members. It's worth keeping an eye on Penny Mordant, says Paul Goodman, who polls a bit better than a mass of her seniors in this trial canter. That's how he describes his poll. How has she done so while being neither at the top table nor a prominent backbencher with an independent profile? Our best guess is a mix of some aggressive Commons performances, a new book, leave credentials, which still count, a breezy, no-nonsense military style, he credits you with, that her views are more socially liberal than those of many party members may matter less than her actually having some views. Authenticity counts for something in modern politics, and Mordant has a dash of it. It's rather ungenerous of him. I think you've got a bit more than a dash of it. Looking at your career to date, and what's been your biggest regret in your political career to date?
Oh gosh. Well, I just would say as an aside, full credit to my comments performances have to go to the SNP and to Lorena. I think they should be given full credit for that.
You need somebody to bounce off, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've just got on with my job, which I think people appreciate especially over the last couple of years that we've had. I think I'm generally not someone that dwells on regrets. As I said at the start, Mark, I'm an optimist, and I'm focused on the future and doing what I can to help the country move on.
So I'm not suggesting this should be a regret at all. I think it's what brought you to public attention. But I'll finish by asking this question from the audience. Did appearing on Splash help your career? This is when you did the diving thing on television, wasn't it? Yeah.
Well, I have a Lido now because my fee went to that, and we're hoping which, mind you, I have to say, Mark, with no public money, renovated the Lido and a few other places as well, so that was great. But one of the great things about doing that show is that I got to meet and became friends with Tom Daley, and I have to say that him winning that gold after so many years was just one of the joys of my life.
Well, it's not too late for you. You could be an Olympic gold medalist.
No, definitely not. I think I described myself as having the diving prowess of a paving slab at the time.
You were very, very sporting to
the Lido was worth it.
Penny, it's been an absolute pleasure to spend an hour with you. Thank you for answering so many wide-ranging questions, and congratulations on now being a captain in the Navy. It's been great having you with us.
Nice
Thanks,
to
Penny. Thanks again to Penny and to all of you who've joined us on both Zoom and YouTube this evening. Thanks especially to our IEA donors. You keep the lights on here, and your generous support helps us keep this event programme running, especially in a year of economic turbulence like the one we've had. You can support the IEA's digital content specifically on Patreon, on that website, by going to patreon.com/IEA London, where we have a specific membership platform that allows our followers to donate specifically to this work. So if you have got a few pennies or pounds spare, please do consider giving us a donation. The IEA is taking a bit of a summer break in terms of live events, but my own show, Live with Littlewood, will be back on Wednesday, the 1st of September at 6 p.m. with an as yet to be announced stellar lineup of guests. But there'll be plenty more content going on the IEA London YouTube channel over the month of August. So if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit that red subscribe button and the notification bell. My thanks again to Penny Mordaunt. Been a delight to have you with us. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe, stay free. Over and out.